The first time I heard my son call me a murderer, I thought my heart stopped. He said my brother told him everything, that I killed their father. But my husband's car crash wasn't an accident. And the lies my brother built over it ran deeper than I ever imagined. So I hired a private investigator, and when we uncovered what really happened that night, who was on that road, what he was driving, and what he covered up, my brother's face went pale, because the only thing dead that night wasn't just my husband. It was the last lie holding our family together. It started with a silence that felt heavier than any scream. My phone stopped ringing. My front door stopped knocking. My own children, my blood, my heartbeat, vanished from my life like I had become a ghost. At first, I thought it was grief resurfacing. The 10th anniversary of Daniel's death always did that to us, brought back the ache, the guilt, the questions. But this was different. This was a cold, deliberate absence. My son, Ethan, didn't answer my calls. My daughter, Lily, stopped replying to my messages. Days passed, then weeks. Then a neighbor, eyes full of pity, whispered the words that turned my stomach inside out. "Elaine, I heard your brother's been saying things. Terrible things. That you had something to do with Daniel's death." I laughed at first, a dry, hollow laugh that didn't sound like me. My brother Mark and I had fought over many things: money, Daniel's estate, even our parents' care. But this, to accuse me of killing my own husband, it was beyond cruel. It was blasphemy. But as I stared at the blank message thread from my children, I realized something terrifying. He'd already convinced them. Whatever poison he'd been spreading had taken root. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same table where Daniel used to read the morning paper, where we celebrated birthdays, where I taught Ethan to tie his first tie. The house was quiet, too quiet. I looked around and realized how much life had drained from these walls since the accident 10 years ago. Daniel had been driving home from a client dinner on a stormy night when his car hit a guardrail and plunged into a ravine. The police said it was an accident. A drunk driver had swerved into his lane. But even back then, parts of the story never made sense. No autopsy photos, no follow-up on the other driver. And Mark. He had arrived at the crash site before I even got the call. He said someone from the precinct phoned him because he was listed as Daniel's emergency contact. But Daniel never would have done that. He always listed me. I remember the funeral like it was yesterday. Mark stood beside the coffin, shaking hands, wiping tears that looked rehearsed. He told people, "Elaine's not herself, she's in shock." Later I realized that was how it started, the quiet rewriting of the narrative. Over time he painted me as fragile, unstable, too emotional to handle finances, too broken to raise my own kids without guidance. I let him help because I was numb. I let him manage the insurance claim, deal with Daniel's company accounts, even comfort the children when I couldn't get out of bed. And little by little, Mark became the center of their lives. It wasn't until years later that I began to see it, how he positioned himself like the hero in our tragedy, the uncle who saved the family, the responsible man who stepped in when their mother fell apart. I was too ashamed of my weakness to fight it. I told myself that as long as my children were loved, it didn't matter who they looked up to. But I was wrong. Love built on lies rots from the inside. The breaking point came one rainy Tuesday morning. I was washing dishes when my phone buzzed. It was Lily. My heart jumped, thinking maybe, finally, she was reaching out. But the message was short. "Mom, please stop calling us. Uncle Mark told us everything. I can't do this anymore." That was it. No explanation. No chance to defend myself. My own daughter believed I had murdered her father. My knees gave out and I sank to the floor, the soapy water pooling around me. I tried to breathe, but it felt like the air itself was accusing me. I could almost hear Daniel's voice whispering from the past. "Elaine, don't let him win." I didn't sleep that night. I walked through the house, tracing my fingers along picture frames, Daniel holding baby Ethan, Lily in her ballet costume, the four of us at the lake. I wanted to smash them, to stop seeing the family I'd lost. But then I stopped at one photo I hadn't noticed in years. Daniel and Mark, arm in arm, smiling at a company barbecue. My husband and my brother, my past and my tormentor. Something inside me hardened. I realized I'd been living in the aftermath of other people's narratives. Mark's lies, the police report's silence, even Daniel's secrets. I couldn't change the past, but I could damn well uncover it. The next morning, I drove to the police station. The same officer who'd handled Daniel's case had retired, but a young clerk found the old file. It was thin, too thin for a fatal crash. A few grainy photos, a one-page summary, and a line that made my heart pound. No toxicology results filed, witness declined, further statement. I flipped through it, frowning. Wasn't there a report on the other driver? I asked. The clerk shrugged. Not here, ma'am. Maybe archived. But honestly, it looks like this one was closed quick. Closed quick. Buried quick. Forgotten quick. I walked out into the rain, gripping that flimsy file to my chest. 10 years of silence suddenly felt like a setup. My husband's death, my brother's rise, my children's hatred, it all connected somehow. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Clarity. I wasn't going to beg my children to believe me. I wasn't going to argue with Mark. I was going to find proof. Because deep down I knew, whatever happened that night on Highway 42, it didn't end in that crash. It started there. I still remember the sound of that night. Not the crash. I never heard that. I mean the silence after Daniel left. The door had slammed, the storm had rolled in, and suddenly the house felt too big, too hollow, too full of words I could never take back. We'd argued before, sure, but that night was different. That night I saw something in his eyes, fear, guilt, something he didn't want to explain. He said, "It's not what you think, Elaine. I'll fix it." I asked, "Fix what?" He didn't answer, just grabbed his keys and walked out into the rain. I yelled after him, angry, stupid words. "Then go. Maybe you'll finally feel something when you lose it all." I never imagined those would be the last words he'd hear from me. The hours after he left felt endless. The storm pounded the windows. Thunder rolled through the valley, and every car that passed made my stomach twist. I tried calling him, straight to voicemail. I tried again and again until the line went dead. When the doorbell rang at 2:17 a.m., I already knew. The officer's face was solemn but practiced. He'd given that speech before. "Mrs. Carter, there's been an accident." He said Daniel had lost control of his car on Highway 42 after swerving to avoid a drunk driver. Instant death. No pain. That's what they all say, like it makes a difference. He handed me a damp envelope with Daniel's wedding ring inside. Only later, I realized, it wasn't his. Daniel's ring had a tiny engraving inside, a phrase we'd chosen together. "Always come home." The one they gave me was plain. It wasn't his. For weeks, I told myself it was just a mix-up. But the truth is, part of me knew something was off. The crash site photos were blurry, half the pages in the report missing. The coroner said they couldn't recover his phone. It had disintegrated in the fire. Yet somehow, Mark had text messages from Daniel that same night, messages he showed the police to help with the timeline. I never saw them myself, but they were enough to close the case. Mark told everyone Daniel had texted him before leaving, saying he needed to clear his head. Convenient, wasn't it? When Mark came to the house the next day, he looked almost composed. He hugged me too long, whispered too softly, "You can't fall apart, Elaine. The kids need stability. Let me take care of the practical stuff." I was drowning, and he handed me a lifeline. I didn't realize it was a leash. He handled the funeral, the insurance, the press. He said the company Daniel ran, our family logistics firm, needed someone competent to handle operations until things settled. He didn't ask if I wanted that someone to be him. He just announced it at the service in front of everyone, like a benevolent savior. My children clung to him. He became their protector while I was still learning how to breathe. In the years that followed, grief turned into something quieter, routine. The house became a museum of unfinished days. I tried to keep busy, volunteering, reading, anything to avoid the gnawing thought that something about Daniel's death didn't add up. Every year on the anniversary, I drove out to the stretch of road where it happened. I'd park near the guardrail and stare at the skid marks that the rain had long since washed away. I'd whisper, "What were you fixing, Daniel?" But the wind never answered. 10 years later, standing there again after the lies Mark spread, the air felt different, colder, charged. I could almost see it now. Mark at that same spot, the glow of a lighter in his hand, watching the flames dance on twisted metal. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but I pushed it aside. I wasn't ready to believe my own brother could have been there. Not yet. But my instincts had teeth, and they were starting to bite. Back home, I dug through the storage boxes I hadn't touched in years. Old photos, tax documents, Daniel's notebooks. And then, wedged between two folders, I found something, a mechanic's receipt dated the day before the accident. It was for tire replacements and brake repairs. Daniel had always been obsessive about maintenance, especially before long drives. The receipt proved his car was in perfect condition, so why had the report claimed mechanical failure as a contributing factor? I needed answers, real ones, not memories distorted by grief. But where do you start when the man who lied about your husband's death is the same man who raised your children to hate you? That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, staring at the ring. I turned it over in my hand, tracing the inside where the engraving should have been. The metal was smooth, cold, unfamiliar. And then it hit me. If this wasn't Daniel's ring, someone had taken his. Someone who wanted it gone. Maybe to cover up a fight, or worse, a theft. My brother had been at the bar that night celebrating a contract deal. I remembered how he avoided my eyes at the funeral, how he'd said, "It's better you don't ask questions, Elaine." For 10 years, I obeyed. I didn't ask, but now I would. I wasn't the broken widow anymore. I was the woman who'd lost everything except the truth, and that made me dangerous. The next morning, I called an old friend from Daniel's company, a quiet accountant named Sarah, who'd always liked me. She hesitated before answering. When I mentioned Daniel's accident, there was a long pause. Then she whispered, "Elaine." Not over the phone. That was when I knew. Something about that night hadn't died with Daniel. It was still alive, rotting, festering, buried under my brother's lies, and I was about to dig it up. Mark always had a way of walking into a room and making it his. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His confidence filled the silence like smoke, slow, choking, impossible to ignore. After Daniel's death, that presence became unbearable. Every time he spoke, it was as if the world rearranged itself around his version of the truth. The police trusted him. The lawyers deferred to him. Even my children, Ethan, who used to call him Uncle Marky with laughter in his voice, began to listen to him more than they listened to me. It happened gradually, almost invisibly, the way erosion works on a shoreline. You don't see it happening until you realize the land beneath your feet is gone. When Daniel died, Mark took over the logistics company under the guise of protecting the family assets. I let him. My brain was fogged with grief, and he made everything sound so logical, so necessary. "Just until you're stable again," he'd said, pouring me tea like a nurse caring for a patient. "I'll manage payroll, contracts, taxes. You focus on healing." I didn't notice that he'd changed the sign on the office door from Carter Freight Solutions to Carter and Associates. Within a year, my name was gone from the paperwork, the bank accounts, even the tax filings. The family business Daniel had built from nothing was now Mark's empire, and I, his sister, the supposed murderer, was nothing more than a ghost in the story he was telling. When I met with Sarah, the accountant, in a small cafe downtown, she looked terrified just being seen with me. Her hands shook around her cup. "Elaine," she whispered, "I shouldn't even be talking to you. Mark's been careful." I leaned forward. Careful about what? She glanced around the cafe like someone might be recording. After Daniel died, a large transfer went through. $500,000, wired from the company to a private account Mark said belonged to a contractor overseas, but the account name was blacked out in our records. I asked about it once, and the next day, my access was revoked. $500,000. Gone the week Daniel died. I felt my pulse quicken. Sarah's voice lowered even more. The police never looked into it because Mark told them it was a legitimate payment. He even showed them signed authorization, Daniel's signature. But Elaine, I saw that signature every day for 10 years. That one wasn't his. I stared at her. "You're sure?" She nodded. "Positive. It was forged." When I left that cafe, the city around me felt foreign, like I was walking through a movie set built out of my own memories. For years, I'd told myself Mark was just manipulative, maybe greedy. But forgery? Money transfers? It wasn't just jealousy or control anymore. It was corruption. He hadn't just taken my husband's company, he'd rewritten history for profit. And my children had been raised to see me as the liar. That night, I pulled out old family videos, the ones I'd stopped watching because they hurt too much. In one clip, Daniel and Mark were grilling in the backyard, arguing over who could flip a steak better. Daniel was laughing, teasing him, calling him the brother I never had to marry into. The camera shook with my laughter in the background. Watching it now, I wanted to reach through the screen and warn that version of us. You don't know what's coming. I paused the video when Daniel turned toward Mark and said, "You'll ruin the company if you keep treating it like a casino." Mark laughed it off, but I saw something there. A flicker, a shadow in his eyes. He wasn't joking. Maybe he never had been. The next morning, I decided to confront him. Not directly, not yet, but close enough to rattle his composure. I drove to the company's new office, the one he'd built downtown with our family's money. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me. "Oh, Mrs. Carter," she stammered. "Mr. Carter didn't mention you were coming." "Of course he didn't," I said with a smile. Mark's office was glass-walled, immaculate, cold. He looked up from behind his desk, perfectly calm, as if he'd been expecting me. "Elaine," he said, his voice smooth as ever. "This is a surprise. What brings you here?" "Closure," I said, "or maybe clarity." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Still chasing ghosts after all these years?" "Maybe I just stopped being afraid of them," I replied. His smile tightened. "You know, you should be careful. People start talking when they see you digging up the past. It's not healthy." I stepped closer to his desk. "Healthy or not, I'm done pretending. You've lied long enough, Mark. I know about the money transfer, the forged signature, and I know you were at the bar the night Daniel died." For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. His hand froze mid-motion, then he forced a laugh. "You sound paranoid, Elaine. Maybe grief's finally catching up to you." "Maybe," I said softly, "but paranoia's just the name people give to truth before it's proven." His eyes hardened, the charm evaporating. "Go home, Elaine. Don't make this uglier than it already is." "I plan to," I said, "just not until I find out why you needed Daniel gone." I walked out before he could answer, my heart pounding, adrenaline burning through years of helplessness. Behind me, I could feel his gaze, cold, calculating, afraid. That night, I sat in my car outside his gated home, watching the lights flicker in the windows. Somewhere inside that house, my brother was hiding the truth. I could feel it, and he knew I was coming for it. The next morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "You're making a mistake, Elaine. Stop before you lose what little you have left." For the first time in 10 years, I smiled. Because finally, Mark was nervous. 2 days after the letter arrived, I woke up to a message that cracked. whatever restraint I had left. It was from my son, Ethan. "Mom, please stop talking to people about Dad. You're embarrassing yourself. Uncle Mark said you've been asking questions again. Let it go. He forgave you. We're trying to do the same. Forgave me." The words hit like glass in the throat. My son, my own flesh, was forgiving me for a crime I never committed, and the man he was defending was the one who stole everything from us. I sat there at the kitchen table staring at the message until the morning light spilled across it, turning the phone screen into a mirror. The face looking back at me wasn't the woman I used to be. It wasn't the quiet widow Mark had kept under control for a decade. It was something colder, sharper, someone who had finally run out of fear. I showered, dressed, and drove without thinking. The highway stretched out before me like a scar. When I reached the section near mile 42, the place where Daniel's car had gone off the road, I pulled over. The wind was howling through the trees, the guardrail glinting in the weak sunlight. The earth below the cliff was overgrown now, the wreckage long removed, but I could still feel it. The memory of fire, of twisted steel, of unanswered questions. There was a small cross there, faded and leaning, the one my children had placed when they still spoke to me. I touched it gently, brushing off the moss, and for the first time I spoke aloud. "Daniel, I'm sorry it took me so long, but I'm going to finish this." Back in my car, I opened the folder the police clerk had given me. Thin, too thin. The crash photos looked like they'd been printed on cheap paper, deliberately blurred, but one detail stood out, a set of tire tracks in the dirt that didn't match Daniel's car. They'd been dismissed in the report as service vehicle traces. I knew better. I'd lived with Daniel long enough to recognize patterns. His car had narrower tires than most trucks. These were wide, heavy, like a pickup. And Mark drove a pickup. I needed proof. Something beyond suspicion, beyond memory. That night, I made a decision that felt both desperate and inevitable. I found a private investigator online. Not one of those glossy flyer types with fake smiles, but an older man with credentials that smelled of police precincts and sleepless nights. His name was Victor Lane. When he answered the phone, his voice was steady, low, the kind of voice that didn't flinch at ugly truths. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "tell me what you think happened." So I did. Every detail, the fight, the accident, the money, the forged documents, the children's silence, Mark's threats. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause on the line, then the faint scratch of a pen. "You think your brother was involved in your husband's death?" "I don't know," I said, "but I think he made sure no one ever looked too closely." He exhaled slowly. "Then we'll look." We met the next day at a diner off the highway. He was older than I expected. Gray hair, rough hands, eyes that had seen too much. He spread out a notepad and a folder before I even sat down. "I don't take cases like this often," he said. "Cold files are hard. People move on. Memories twist." "I haven't moved on," I said quietly. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. That's what we'll need." Victor worked methodically, starting with the crash report. He scribbled notes as I recited details, occasionally asking sharp questions that made me realize how much I'd missed. "You said your husband's phone was destroyed," he said. "Was there cloud storage? Sync backup?" I don't know." He looked up. "Let's find out." He left with the file, promising to contact me when he had something solid. For the first time in years, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. But hope has teeth, and it bites when you let your guard down. That evening, as I drove home, I saw Mark's car parked at the end of my street. He was sitting inside, headlights off, cigarette glowing between his fingers, watching my house. I stopped at the corner, engine idling. For a moment, our eyes met through the fogged glass, mine steady, his dark and narrow. Then he smirked, flicked the cigarette out the window, and drove away without a word. He knew I'd started digging, and he wasn't going to let me do it quietly. That night, I locked every door and sat by the window until dawn, waiting for his car to come back. It never did. But when I opened my mailbox the next morning, another letter waited for me. No handwriting, just block letters printed from a computer. "You're making enemies you can't see. Stop before it's too late." I looked up at the empty street, the still morning air, the neighbors' sprinklers whispering against the pavement. Then I folded the letter neatly, tucked it into the same file with the police report, and whispered, "Too late already." Victor arrived at my house the next morning, punctual to the minute. He carried no briefcase, no badge, just a worn leather notebook and a face that looked carved from experience. His eyes scanned everything: the unwatered plants, the faded wedding photo on the mantel, the unopened mail stacked by the door. He didn't say much, just nodded once and asked, "May I see the file?" I handed him everything I had: police reports, the letters, the photos. He studied them without a word, flipping pages slowly, methodically. When he reached the section marked "Witness Statements," his brow furrowed. "There's only one," he murmured. "A truck driver named Tom Easton. Says he saw the crash but declined to give details later." He looked up at me. "Did anyone ever follow up?" "No," I said. "They told me he moved out of state." Victor gave a dry smile. "They always do." He took notes, then asked about Mark. I told him everything, from the inheritance manipulation to the rumors about me murdering Daniel. He listened like a man watching a chess game play out in slow motion. When I mentioned the money transfer Sarah found, his pen paused mid-air. "You said it was $500,000? "Yes. And the signature was forged. She swore it wasn't Daniel's." He nodded slowly. "That's motive, Mrs. Carter. Not proof yet, but close." He spent the rest of the day driving back and forth from the crash site to the police archives. At dusk, he returned with mud on his shoes and a grin that made my stomach twist. "You were right," he said. "The accident file was tampered with. The original tire analysis is missing, and there's a memo that was supposed to be attached. Something about a second vehicle leaving the scene." My heart dropped. A hit and run? Maybe. Or maybe someone wanted it to look that way. I stared out the window as the sky turned crimson. Daniel's face swam before my eyes. His laugh, his hands, the way he used to say, "Trust your instincts, Elaine." My instincts were screaming now. Victor leaned forward, his voice steady. "I'll track the witness. If he's alive, he's the key." "And my brother?" I asked. He hesitated. "If Mark's involved, he's careful. Men like him always are. But they slip eventually." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Mark smirk in the car window, that calm superiority he'd always worn like armor. I thought about my children, how easily he'd stolen their loyalty, their love. He didn't just destroy my family, he rewrote its history. At 2 a.m., the phone rang. It was Victor. "Sorry to call late," he said. "I ran your husband's name through an old insurance database. Did you know his life policy was doubled a month before his death?" I sat upright. "Doubled?" "Yes. And guess who's listed as the secondary beneficiary?" I didn't breathe. "Mark." "Bingo," Victor said. "But that's not the strange part. The change wasn't processed by your husband. It was done by a proxy with power of attorney." My mind raced. "I never signed anything." "You didn't," he said quietly. "Someone forged your name, too." The line went silent. I could hear only my pulse pounding in my ears. For years, I'd blamed myself for that last argument with Daniel. I thought guilt was my punishment. But now it was morphing into something else: anger. Before hanging up, Victor said something that stayed with me. "Truth doesn't disappear, Mrs. Carter. It just waits for the right person to dig it up." When dawn came, I found myself in Daniel's study, a room I'd avoided for a decade. Dust covered the shelves, but everything was as he'd left it, organized, precise. I opened the bottom drawer of his desk and froze. Inside were documents I'd never seen before: bank statements, handwritten notes, and a file labeled Carter, Freight, partnership proposal. The last page had 2 signatures, Daniel's and Mark's. Underneath Daniel's name was a scribbled note in his handwriting. Need to talk. This is getting out of hand. I sat there for a long time, staring at those words, feeling the air drain from the room. Daniel had discovered something that made him confront Mark, and the night he died, he told me, "I'll fix it." Maybe that was exactly what he was trying to do. I folded the papers neatly and called Victor. "I found something," I said. "It's time you met my brother." The morning Victor met Mark was one I'll never forget, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The silence in that office could have cut glass. I stayed outside pretending to scroll through my phone while Victor went in. Through the frosted glass, I could see their silhouettes, my brother leaning back, relaxed, the investigator steady and unblinking. 2 men sizing each other up across a chessboard neither wanted to admit existed. It lasted less than 15 minutes. When Victor came out, his face was unreadable. He walked past me without a word until we reached the car. Then, finally, he said, "He's either very confident or very afraid. Sometimes those look the same." I waited for him to continue. He didn't. He just started the engine and drove toward Highway 42. We stopped at the exact bend where Daniel's car had gone over. The road was newer now, repaved, smoother, but Victor crouched at the guardrail, running his fingers along the bolts like a surgeon tracing scar tissue. "These aren't original," he murmured. "Replaced, maybe 6 months ago." I frowned. 6 months ago? After 10 years? Exactly. He pulled out a small flashlight and pointed it under the beam. The bolts were clean, too clean, like they'd been installed yesterday. Someone had removed the old section and replaced it. "Why would anyone do that?" I asked. He looked up at me. "Because the old one probably had evidence." We followed the shoulder trail down to the lower embankment, where weeds had swallowed the earth. The air was damp, heavy with rot. Victor found small shards of glass glinting under the mud, clear, tinted, and one fragment with a faint manufacturer's mark. He bagged it carefully. "Windshield glass," he said, "but not from your husband's car. Wrong tint." As he stood, I noticed his hand trembling slightly. "Victor?" He didn't look at me. "There was another car here. I'd bet my license on it." We drove back in silence. My mind spun through every possibility. Mark following Daniel after that fight, trying to scare him into signing something, losing control. Or maybe not losing control at all. Maybe he'd planned it perfectly. That night, Victor called. I tracked down that witness. Tom Easton. He's in Nevada now, retired. Says he was pressured to stay quiet. Someone paid him off. Back then, he's agreed to talk, but not over the phone. Pressured by who? He wouldn't say. But when I mentioned your brother's name, he hung up. I sat in my living room long after we ended the call, the house breathing around me in quiet creaks. Every shadow looked like a memory I hadn't faced. For 10 years, I'd been afraid to picture that night too vividly. Now I couldn't stop. I imagined Daniel driving through the rain, windshield wipers beating time to his thoughts, headlights slicing through fog, a pair of brighter ones behind him, getting closer. Maybe he recognized the truck. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he slowed. Maybe he called out a name just before the impact. The image of that twisted metal returned, the one the papers had shown. And I saw it differently this time, not as tragedy, but as erasure. The next morning, Victor called again. "You said your brother drove a black Ford pickup." "Yes." "Still does?" "As far as I know." "Well," he said, "the fragment we found matches that exact make and model, year 2012. I felt the world tilt. That's the same year Daniel died. Right. And the truck Mark drives now? It's newer, 2017, which means he replaced it soon after the crash. He paused, then added quietly, "I'll get a warrant for the VIN history. If the old one was scrapped, we'll find the record. Unless, of course, it was destroyed." That evening, I couldn't stop pacing. Every memory with Mark, every smile, every word of advice felt poisoned. He'd played the perfect brother so convincingly that I'd forgotten to ask why he never seemed to grieve Daniel, why he'd spent that funeral whispering to lawyers instead of comforting my children, why he'd always redirected the conversation whenever that night came up. Later, as I tried to rest, I heard tires crunching outside. I peeked through the curtains. A car idled across the street, dark, lights off. For a second, I thought it was Mark again, but when the headlights finally flicked on, the car drove away. Still, the unease stayed. In the morning, Victor texted, "We have confirmation. Mark's old truck was declared totaled 5 days after Daniel's death, filed as a single-car accident, front-end damage consistent with impact." I read the message 3 times. The air left my lungs. A single-car accident. The same language they used in Daniel's report, and then I understood. Mark hadn't just been at the scene that night. He'd been part of it, and somehow he'd walked away clean, leaving Daniel dead, me broken, and the truth buried beneath forged papers and fake pity. That was the moment my grief finally turned into resolve. I wasn't looking for closure anymore. I was hunting a man who'd killed my husband and stolen my life. 2 days later, Victor called from Nevada. His voice had that edge I'd started to recognize, the kind that came only when he was standing too close to something dangerous. "I found Tom Easton," he said. "He's not exactly thrilled to talk, but I think he will if you come here yourself." My first instinct was fear. I hadn't left this state in years, not since Daniel's funeral, but the fear dissolved quickly into something sharper. "Text me the address," I said. "I'll be there tomorrow." The flight was long, the kind that forces you to think about every choice that brought you to the present. I kept my hands clenched in my lap the entire time, staring at the clouds and replaying that night over and over. Daniel's last words, Mark's calm, lies, the years of silence that followed. Somewhere between those memories, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would bring the truth home, no matter what it cost. Tom lived in a sunburned trailer park outside Reno. When we arrived, he looked older than his years, his skin tanned like leather and his eyes hidden behind dark glasses. He didn't shake my hand. He just looked at me for a long moment and said, "You're Daniel Carter's wife?" "Yes." My voice trembled despite my best effort. He turned toward Victor. "You didn't tell me she was coming." "She insisted," Victor said. Tom sighed, motioned for us to sit on the porch. The desert wind whistled through the broken slats. "I shouldn't be doing this," he muttered. "They told me to forget it ever happened." "Who?" I asked. He hesitated, chewing his lower lip. "A man in a suit came to my house 2 days after the crash. Said he worked for the insurance company. He gave me $5,000 cash and told me the report would say what it needed to. I was broke. My wife was sick. I took it." My chest tightened. "What did you see that night, Tom?" He looked past us, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Your husband's car was in the right lane, moving steady. Rain was bad, but visibility wasn't zero. Then a black pickup came up behind him. Fast. Too fast. It tailgated for maybe 10 seconds, flashing its high beams. I thought it was just some idiot trying to pass, but then it pulled up beside him, real close, like they were racing. Next thing I know, the truck nudged him. Once. Hard. Your husband's car spun, hit the guardrail, and went over. The truck stopped for a second, I swear to God, and then drove off." The world seemed to tilt. The sound of the wind faded. It was as if the desert itself went silent. "You saw the driver?" Victor asked quietly. Tom hesitated. "No, the windows were tinted, but I saw the plate. I wrote it down before I realized what I'd done." He disappeared inside the trailer, then returned with a small, yellowed notepad. He flipped to a page half torn from age. "Here." Victor leaned over and read the number aloud. My stomach turned. The digits matched the first 3 of Mark's old truck, the one he'd reported as totaled days after Daniel's crash. "Why didn't you come forward?" I whispered. Tom's eyes glistened. "Because the man in the suit wasn't from any insurance company. He was from the police department. Said if I talked, They'd charge me with obstruction for interfering at the scene. He said the driver was already taken care of, that it was an internal matter. I sat there, frozen, unable to speak. Victor reached for my hand under the table. Steady, grounding. "We'll protect you, Tom. But we'll need a signed statement." He shook his head. "No, I'll talk, but not on paper. They'd fine me." That night, Victor and I checked into a motel off the highway. Neither of us slept. He sat at the small table with his laptop, typing up every word Tom had said. "If we can't get his signature," he muttered, "we'll get his voice." We went back the next morning with a small recorder. Tom was nervous, pacing, but finally agreed. He repeated everything, his voice trembling when he reached the part about the license plate. When he finished, he lit a cigarette, stared at the smoke, and said softly, "You know, I've seen that truck again, parked near the same road about a year after the crash. Same color, same dent on the tailgate. Someone was visiting the site." Victor and I exchanged a glance. Mark. Back in the car, I couldn't speak. My throat burned, and I felt the old grief claw its way up my chest, but it wasn't grief anymore. It was fury. Daniel hadn't lost control. He hadn't been drunk. He'd been hunted. Victor broke the silence. "We have enough to start tearing the cover-up apart, but it won't be easy. The cops who buried this, they'll protect themselves." "Then we go higher," I said. "Find someone who isn't in his pocket." "Elaine," he warned. "This could get ugly." I turned to him, my voice low, steady. "It already is." We flew home that night, the recording locked in Victor's briefcase. As the plane descended, I looked out the window at the city lights, the same city where Mark lived, where my children still believed their uncle was a saint. By the time the wheels touched the runway, I knew what had to come next. I wasn't just going to expose my brother. I was going to make him feel what it's like to lose everything you've built on a lie. When I got home, my front porch light was shattered. Just the bulb. No forced entry, no damage. Just darkness where there should have been light. It felt deliberate, like a message. I ignored the unease crawling up my spine, went inside and locked the door behind me. The air smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, Mark's brand. I told myself it was imagination, but deep down, I knew. He'd been here. Victor called the next morning. "I've started cross-checking Tom's story. The plate number's a match for your brother's old registration. That truck was written off 6 days after the crash, then scrapped 2 counties over. The paperwork's signed by a police officer who's now retired, one of Mark's golf buddies." My stomach twisted. He was inside their system from the start. Victor's tone hardened. "And we're about to pull him out by the roots." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. It was my daughter, Lily. I hadn't seen her in over a year. Her hair was shorter, her eyes red-rimmed, but the coldness in her voice could have frozen water. "Uncle Mark told us you're spreading lies again." She stepped past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. "Mom, why can't you stop? He's the only one who tried to keep this family together." Her words were knives wrapped in sorrow. I wanted to hug her, to shake her, to scream that everything she knew was false, but I kept my voice calm. "Lily, please, sit down. I just need you to listen for 5 minutes." She crossed her arms. "Is this about Dad's death again?" "Yes, and about the man who's been lying to you about it." She scoffed. "Uncle Mark said you'd say that. He showed us proof, Mom. Messages Dad sent him that night. You told Dad you'd ruin him. You told him he'd regret it when he crashed." My breath caught. "What?" She pulled out her phone, showing me screenshots of text messages, grainy, slightly blurred, but the words were unmistakable. "You'll regret this. You'll crash and burn." My name was at the top, my number. My heart dropped into my stomach. "Lily, those are fake," I whispered. "Uncle Mark said you'd say that too," she snapped, voice trembling. "He said the guilt was eating you alive." I took her hands gently. "Do you really think I could hurt your father? Do you remember the night of the crash? I was home. I called you to bed after dinner." She pulled away. "Stop. Just stop. I don't know what to believe anymore." I wanted to tell her everything about the forged insurance forms, the witness, the truck, but something in me hesitated. She wasn't ready. If I dropped it all at once, she'd think it was madness. So I said only, "Your father's death wasn't what you think, and one day you're going to see proof. When that happens, I want you to remember one thing. I never stopped loving you." Her eyes softened just for a heartbeat. Then she turned, tears streaking down her cheeks, and left. I stood in the doorway long after she'd driven away, the sound of her car fading into the distance. Later that night, I called Victor. "He's forged more than Daniel's signature," I said. "He forged messages, too." Victor didn't sound surprised. "Classic isolation technique. He's feeding your kids just enough poison to keep them loyal." "What do we do?" He paused. We flipped the story. Give him a reason to show his hand. The plan was simple but risky. We'd let Mark think the police were reopening Daniel's case. A false lead, planted carefully. If he panicked, he'd make a mistake. 2 days later, Victor called me from the precinct. "It's done. I filed a formal request for a case audit. Public record. It'll look like a reopening." Within hours, Mark called. His voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "What the hell are you doing, Elaine?" "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play dumb. You think you can dig up the past without burying yourself, too? I warned you." "I'm just looking for the truth." "The truth?" He laughed, low and bitter. "You wouldn't know truth if it stared you in the mirror. Drop it before it destroys what's left of your family." And then, the words that made my blood run cold. "You're not the only one who lost control that night." He hung up. I sat frozen, staring at the phone, his voice echoing in my head. "You're not the only one who lost control." What did that mean? Was it an admission, a threat? That night, Victor came over. I played him the recorded call. I'd been recording since our plan began. He listened twice, then looked at me with a small, grim smile. "We got him rattled," he said. "He's starting to slip." "But it's not enough," I said. "We need proof that ties him to Daniel's car, not just words." Victor nodded. "Then it's time we dig where he least expects, his own company records. If he paid off cops, if he transferred that hush money, there'll be traces, digital ghosts." As he spoke, I felt something shift in me. For 10 years, I'd been the victim of a story someone else wrote. Now I was rewriting it, line by line, truth by truth. But even as that fire grew in me, I couldn't shake one thought. If Mark realized how close we were, he wouldn't just threaten me. He'd come for me. By the following week, the illusion of calm around Mark began to crack. He didn't know how much we'd learned, but he knew something was closing in on him. The man who used to walk into every room like he owned the air itself suddenly looked over his shoulder when he thought no one was watching. His arrogance had finally started to rot. Victor called me early one morning, his voice steady but urgent. "Elaine, you need to come by my office." "Did you find something?" "More than something. Just get here." When I arrived, the blinds were drawn. A single desk lamp glowed over a pile of folders. Victor motioned for me to sit, then clicked play on his laptop. The screen showed blurry night footage. Time-stamped the night Daniel died. The frame captured a 2-lane stretch of Highway 42, hazy from rain. A car's headlights appeared, followed closely by another pair. Then, for just a second, the trailing lights swerved and glinted off chrome. "That's Daniel's car in front," Victor said quietly. The footage came from a trucking company's old dash cam. Their driver happened to pass the stretch a minute after the crash. The footage was buried in a backup drive, almost deleted. "And the second car?" I asked, leaning forward. He paused the video and zoomed in. The shape of the second vehicle sharpened, a dark pickup. "Ford F-150, 2012 model. Same year, same type your brother owned." My throat went dry. "Can we prove it's his?" "Not yet," Victor said, "but we're getting close." He opened another folder. I pulled his financials. A week before the crash, Mark made 2 cash withdrawals, $50,000 each, from a joint business account. 2 days after Daniel's death, he deposited the same amount into an offshore holding under his own name. And guess whose name appears as the intermediary on the transfer? I swallowed. The retired officer? He nodded. Bingo. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. It's all there, the payoff to the witness, the falsified crash report, the insurance policy. We just need one more thing, his voice connecting himself to Daniel's death. The word voice echoed in my mind. I thought of the recorded call, his tone when he said, "You're not the only one who lost control that night." Would that count? I asked. Victor shook his head. Not without context. It sounds like an argument. We need him to say it clearly. Guilt in his own words. That evening, I couldn't eat. The footage kept looping in my head. Those headlights weaving through the rain, the sudden swerve, the moment of contact. I realized I'd been waiting 10 years to see that image, to have proof that I hadn't gone mad. The next morning, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside. When I looked through the blinds, Mark's truck was in my driveway. The newer one. Black, gleaming like sin. My pulse spiked. I thought of calling Victor, but something inside me stopped. No, not yet. If he was here, it meant he was scared. I could use that. He didn't knock. He walked straight in like he still had that right. "We need to talk," he said. I stayed by the kitchen counter, phone recording quietly beneath the dish towel. "About what?" he smirked. "About you running around with your pet detective, harassing decent people. You think this makes you look strong, Elaine? You're humiliating yourself, and you're dragging Daniel's name through the mud." I folded my arms. "You already did that for me." His eyes flickered, a flash of real anger, quick and ugly. "You're making a mistake. You think this little game will bring your kids back? They hate you because you can't stop living in the past." "I'm not living in it," I said softly. "I'm digging it up." That got to him. He stepped closer, jaw tight. "Drop this before you ruin everything." "Everything?" I said. "Or just everything you built from Daniel's death?" For a heartbeat, his mask cracked. He slammed his palm against the counter so hard the glasses rattled. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell me," I shouted back. "Tell me why your truck was at the crash site. Tell me why. A witness wrote down your license plate. Tell me why Daniel's insurance doubled a month before he died, and why you forged his name." He froze. Color drained from his face. Then he laughed, cold, sharp, panicked. "You're insane," he said, but his voice had lost its balance. "You always were. You think anyone's going to believe a woman who's been unstable since her husband's accident?" I smiled then, slow and deliberate. "Maybe not, but they'll believe your voice." I lifted the towel, showing the phone. The red light blinked softly. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Then he turned, storming out the door, tires screaming against the gravel as he sped away. 10 minutes later, Victor arrived. I played the recording for him. When it ended, he nodded slowly. "Not a confession," he said, "but close enough to force one." He glanced toward the window. He'll know now that he's cornered, and when men like him get cornered, they lash out. I finished. Victor met my eyes. "We'll be ready. I'll go to the DA in the morning. Tonight, lock your doors." That night, I didn't sleep. The house felt alive. Every creak, every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. But beneath the fear was something new, anticipation. Because for the first time in 10 years, I could feel the end approaching, the truth stretching its hand toward the light. And when it finally came out, I promised myself it wouldn't just clear Daniel's name. It would bury Mark's. The next 48 hours felt like the breath before a storm. Victor and I had enough to corner Mark, but not enough to finish him. We needed him to speak, to confirm in his own voice what he'd done. And the only way to do that was to make him believe the world was already turning against him. So we built the trap. Victor arranged a meeting at the county records office with a friend of his, a clerk who owed him a favor. They would accidentally leak word that Daniel Carter's case file had been reopened due to new forensic evidence. Within hours, the rumor spread through the same small-town channels Mark used to control the narrative years ago. I didn't have to wait long. By nightfall, Mark showed up at my house again, uninvited, furious. His truck headlights cut through the curtains like twin searchlights. The knock that followed rattled the door. I hit record on my phone before I opened it. He stood on the porch, rain soaking his expensive jacket, his hair plastered to his forehead. "What the hell are you doing, Elaine?" he barked. "Do you have any idea what you've started?" I kept my tone calm, almost casual. "Justice, I suppose." "This isn't justice, it's suicide." He pushed past me, dripping rain onto the floor. "You want to drag the family name through the mud? Fine. But you think the cops will protect you when they realize how deep this goes? They'll protect themselves first." His voice cracked, not with guilt, but with panic. He wasn't defending innocence, he was defending control. I folded my arms. "You sound nervous, Mark." "Guilty men always do." He turned on me, eyes wild. "You have no idea what I've covered for you." That stopped me cold. "Covered? For me?" He started pacing. "You think Daniel was perfect? He wasn't. He stole from the company, Elaine. He put us at risk. I just wanted to scare him, to make him understand. But he wouldn't listen. He swerved. He made me." He froze mid-sentence, realizing what he'd just said. The color drained from his face. I whispered, "Made you what, Mark?" He shook his head violently. "This conversation never happened." "It did," I said softly, showing him the red recording light on my phone. "And it's not the only one." He lunged for it, but I stepped back. "Try it," I said. "Go ahead, add assault to the list." He stopped, breathing hard, the old charm gone. "You can't prove anything," he hissed. "Maybe not yet," I said. "But Victor can. He has witnesses. He has your bank records. And now he has your confession." For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in my brother's eyes. Not guilt, not regret, fear. He stumbled back toward the door, muttering, "You don't know what you're doing." Then he slammed it behind him and tore out of the driveway. I stood there for a long time, rain still falling, the silence ringing in my ears. When I finally exhaled, it came out like a sob. The next morning, Victor played back the recording. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough, his voice clearly admitting to chasing Daniel that night, claiming it was to scare him. That alone could open a manslaughter investigation. "We'll take this to the DA," Victor said. "He'll have no choice but to act. Between this and the witness testimony, the case reopens officially." But something in me hesitated. "He won't go quietly, Victor." He nodded. "I know. Then neither will I." That night, I wrote a letter to my children. No pleading, no apologies, just the truth, laid out in full. I included copies of the dash cam photo, the money trail, the witness transcript, and the audio recording. I told them I didn't need forgiveness. I just needed them to know their father hadn't died because of a fight, but because of greed wearing a familiar face. By the time I sealed the envelopes, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse with Victor. The DA listened, stone-faced, then nodded once. "We'll issue a warrant today." It was done. Mark Carter, the man who stole my husband's life, my children's trust, and my own sanity, was finally about to answer for everything he'd buried under his empire of lies. But as I walked out of that building, wind cutting through the parking lot, I couldn't shake one thought. Men like Mark don't go down without setting something on fire first. By morning, the storm had finally broken. Not the weather, the truth. Victor called at 6 a.m., his voice low and sharp. "They got him." I sat up in bed, my heart hammering. "What do you mean?" "The DA approved the warrant last night. Police picked Mark up at his office an hour ago. He didn't even fight it, just asked for his lawyer. They're charging him with vehicular manslaughter, insurance fraud, and obstruction. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My hands trembled around the phone, not from fear, but from disbelief. After 10 years of silence, of being branded the monster in my own story, the world had finally flipped back to where it belonged. But victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like exhaustion. When I arrived at the precinct, the air buzzed with whispers. Reporters clustered outside. Mark sat in an interrogation room behind the glass, calm, polished, even in handcuffs, the kind of calm that had fooled everyone for a decade. The detective leading the case looked up from the file and said, "We've got enough to hold him. The dash cam footage, the witness statement, the recordings." But the kicker. The officer who signed off on the crash report flipped. He admitted your brother paid him. I stared through the glass at Mark. He must have sensed me watching because he looked up, straight at me and smiled. That same practiced smile. Except this time there was no charm, just venom. They let me observe the questioning. I didn't speak, just listened. The detective slid a copy of Victor's recording across the table. Mark leaned back. "You think that proves anything?" I said it was an accident. I was trying to scare him, that's all. The detective raised an eyebrow. "You mean Daniel Carter?" Mark's silence filled the room. Then, in a moment so small it could have been missed, his eyes flickered. Fear, shame, something cracking open inside. He looked at me through the glass again, and for a second, the mask slipped. He saw not his sister, not his victim, but his reckoning. By the time I stepped outside, the sun was cutting through the clouds. Victor was waiting on the steps, leaning against his car. "It's over," he said simply. "No," I replied. "It's just beginning." Because there were still 2 people who needed to know the truth, my children. That evening, I called them both. Ethan answered first, cautious, his voice uncertain. "Mom, come home," I said softly. "There's something you need to see." When they arrived, I didn't speak at first. I just played the recording. Mark's confession, the dash cam footage, Tom Easton's trembling voice. Then I handed them the letter I'd written days earlier. Ethan sat rigid, his jaw tightening with every word. Lily's hands shook. When the recording ended, she whispered, "He lied to us. All this time." I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. He lied to all of us." Ethan covered his face with his hands. "He said you were unstable. He showed us messages. Fake messages. God, Mom, we believed him." Tears burned in my eyes, but I stayed steady. "You believed what you were meant to believe. That's what he was best at." Lily stood abruptly, pacing. "He killed Dad, and he made us hate you." Her voice cracked on the last word. I walked to her, slow, cautious, and touched her shoulder. "The hate wasn't yours, baby. It was his, wearing your face." She turned then, sobbing into my arms like she was 10 years old again. Ethan joined her, and for the first time in a decade, my family was whole. Not perfect, not healed, but together in truth. Later, as they slept on the couch, exhausted from crying, Victor called again. "They're keeping Mark overnight," he said. "He's not talking anymore, but the DA's going to push for a full confession once the fraud audit is complete." "What happens to the company?" "It reverts to you. Daniel's shares were never legally transferred." For a moment, I just listened to the quiet hum on the line. Then I said, "Thank you, Victor, for everything." He chuckled softly. "Don't thank me yet. The story's not over until you get your piece." I looked at my children asleep, the house finally feeling like home again. I think peace just walked back through my front door. Still, when I closed my eyes that night, I saw Mark's face in the interrogation glass, his smirk fading into fear. And I realized the truth didn't just free me. It trapped him in a story he could no longer control. It's strange how silence feels different once the truth comes out. For 10 years, it had been a suffocating thing, heavy, accusing, crawling through the walls of my house. But now, It was softer, lighter, the kind of silence that lets you breathe again. Mark's trial began 6 months later. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and cold coffee, the scent of waiting and reckoning. He sat at the defense table in a gray suit, his charm gone, his arrogance replaced by something hollow. He wouldn't look at me, not once. Maybe because he finally understood what I'd taken from him. Not his money, not his reputation, but his illusion of control. When the dash cam footage played, the courtroom went quiet. The sound of rain, the headlights, the faint metallic screech, and then the crash. The jurors flinched. I watched them see what I had lived with for a decade, and when the witness testimony followed, when Tom Easton's trembling voice recounted the truth, I saw Mark's shoulders sag. His lawyer whispered something, but he didn't respond. By the end of the second week, it was over. Guilty. On all counts. Vehicular manslaughter, insurance fraud, obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The papers called it the Carter family scandal. I called it the end of a lie. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust. Forward, voices overlapping. Mrs. Carter, how does it feel to finally have justice? Do you forgive your brother? I paused at the steps, the flashbulbs painting the air in bursts of white. Justice, I said, isn't about punishment. It's about truth finding its way home. Then I turned and walked away. Ethan and Lily were waiting by the car. My son's hand found mine. Lily's head rested on my shoulder. "We're so sorry, Mom," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "You have nothing to be sorry for. We all believe the wrong man." Ethan's jaw tightened. Not anymore. That night, we went to Daniel's grave, the three of us standing under a pale sky. I placed fresh lilies beside his headstone and whispered, "It's done, love. They know." For a while, no one spoke. The wind moved through the trees, and for the first time, it didn't sound like a ghost. It sounded like release. Months passed. The company came back under my name, but I didn't want it. I sold it and donated part of the proceeds to fund a small nonprofit that helped victims of wrongful accusations. People like me buried alive under someone else's lies. I named it the Carter Foundation for Truth and Justice. Victor visited sometimes. He never stayed long, but he always brought coffee and news. One afternoon, he sat across from me on the porch, watching the sunset bleed across the horizon. "You ever think about forgiving him?" he asked. I thought for a long moment. "Forgiveness isn't something you give to the person who hurt you," I said quietly. "It's what you give to yourself when you're tired of carrying their sin." He smiled. "Then I'd say you're finally free." Later that evening, when the sky deepened into night, Lily found me looking through an old photo album, one of the few Mark hadn't burned from my past. There was Daniel standing beside the ocean, wind in his hair, smiling that easy, disarming smile that made everyone trust him. Lily sat beside me. "He'd be proud of you," she said. "No," I murmured. "He'd be proud of us." We stayed like that until the moon rose, the house filled with a quiet peace that had been missing for too long. Before bed, I stepped outside one last time. The garden smelled of wet earth and jasmine. I looked up at the stars, the same ones Daniel used to count on warm summer nights, and whispered, "It's over." But the truth was, it wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The kind that only comes after you've walked through fire and come out with the ashes in your hands, no longer afraid of what burned you. My brother's lies had destroyed everything I loved, but the truth rebuilt it, stronger, cleaner, unbreakable. And for the first time in 10 years, I could finally say the words out loud without flinching. My name is Elaine Carter. I didn't kill my husband, but I did bury the man who tried to kill the truth.